Okay, welcome to the study group. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you, Derek.
Welcome, everyone at home. Today, we're going to be starting a 4-part study on faith. And it's kind of a complex topic, something that's lived, not easily spoken, but we're going to attempt to share our reflections on our lived experience of faith as it's interpreted in the Urantia Book and how that kind of breaks down as we saw in 4 parts. So Chuck, if you want to share the 4 parts that we're going to be studying.
Sure. So we're going to look at faith from these 4 directions, you might say, or 4 aspects of faith. Today, we're going to be talking about exploring true faith. When the Urantia Book talks about true faith, what is meant by that. And then the next one will be living faith. And then faith and hope, how faith relates to hope. And then finally, to pull it all together, we're going to do a short study on the faith of Jesus. So this should be a really interesting overview of faith in general. And the idea of true faith has been kind of important to me because faith can be understood in many different ways. Sometimes people use the word faith to refer to a tradition or a religion, or the atheists like to say faith is believing things without proof.
Right.
So there's these different sort of erroneous concepts of faith that aren't really what faith is about in the sense that we'll be exploring here. So we'll launch into this, but the takeaway here is to get a stronger understanding of faith and how that can play a role in our lives and what it really, really is about in terms of our relationship with God, especially.
All right. Well, maybe we can go into this title slide.
Yes, let's do that. So I'll read this. This is a comment that I think is appropriate here. It says, convictions about God may be arrived at through wise reasoning. In other words, we can approach God through our minds, but the individual becomes God knowing only by faith, through personal experience. So it's like you could read in a book about somebody, or maybe somebody you're going to meet. You can read about them on Facebook or whatever. You can learn about someone, through reasoning and investigation, but you can't really know someone without engaging with them personally through actual personal experience.
Yeah.
And this is especially true of God.
And Jesus.
And Jesus.
Like it reminds me of this material way of the high school rumor spreading. And that, you find your validation through external, titling. We all get these titles that we're given in an external environment, but finding the truth or Jesus or the spirit of truth or spiritual reality, it's more of an internal validation process. Mm-hmm. And maybe I think we might see in true faith here the importance of living, of how faith is lived, and how only through our own earned experience do we really get to then step back and see what faith really is and how we can share. And so that's kind of what we're attempting to do here, is from our lived experience, share what we see faith as through this revelation.
Yeah. And in the terms of what they're talking about here, they're talking about an actual relationship, that we come to know God through having an actual relationship with God, not just a kind of a intellectual acceptance of the idea of God, but actually taking the initiative on our part to reach out to God and have a ongoing relationship. And that's how we truly come to know God. And because God is invisible, or Jesus or the Mother Spirit, however is most suitable for any individual to approach God, whatever feels psychologically and spiritually and emotionally most appropriate. In all of those approaches, it's about taking the initiative to reach out to God and then feeling the response. And then it becomes a reality, but it's on a faith basis because God is always invisible. We can't see God. So this whole idea of having a living relationship with an invisible personality is part of where the faith aspect comes in. But we'll get more into that as we go through the slides.
Yeah, not to throw too many terms at you right away.
Yeah.
But let me just get into this first slide where we're talking about true faith. This is from paper 101. Mankind can never discover divinity except through the avenue of religious experience and by the exercise of true faith. So we talk about the avenue it's I like how they set this up. It's almost like this environment of where we can now interact, this avenue of where we can interact with divinity and discover it. But we have to exercise faith in order to access that avenue, to get on the on-ramp. Faith is our on-ramp into this new environment where we can access divinity.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And it's more than belief. I mean, belief may be part of it. Belief may be part of the intellectual on-ramp, but the personal on-ramp is faith.
Yeah, it's an internal on-ramp.
Yeah.
Because I always find that intellectual beliefs are more of this kind of material, external validation, you know, and then this internal validation is really the arena where we can exercise faith, because everything in the environment is already arranged and can be predicted, you know, in a material construct. But everything new comes from spirit.
Right.
Everything new comes from the well within. And so that's really where we're accessing new avenues.
Exactly.
And we have to live a religious life, spirit-led life to access these.
That's our source of originality. Yeah.
So let me read this next one. And all such true faith is predicated on profound reflection, sincere self-criticism, and uncompromising moral consciousness. So the sense of reflection, but without this over self-indulgent, self-importance, brooding thing too. But this is where sincerity is so important, I think, because insincerity is enlightened honesty for the most part. And that's where then the self-criticism is more in reflection to what the thought adjuster is trying to do, as opposed to what the material football coach is making you feel bad about or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's me personally, but still.
Right. We all have voices in our heads.
Sure.
telling us we're not good enough.
Sure.
But on the other hand, I mean, I think what they're pointing to here, or what they're saying, is we need to bring our best to this. We need to bring our best game to this endeavor of knowing God. And that it is a faith experience, but it's predicated on things that are very real. You know, our reflection on our reflective thoughts on reality, our attempts to figure out what the heck is going on is important, because that creates a foundation then where we have this desire to connect with the sources of reality. And the same thing with the self-criticism. It's not to be beat up on yourself, but to bring your best. And the same with this uncompromising moral consciousness as well. These are things that lift us up, in other words.
This is also the avenue in where we can see God's work in our life. When we reflect on our life and we give it this sincere reflection, we can start to see the hand of divinity playing a role if we're open. And I think only in that avenue of that reflection are you allowed to really entertain these concepts of divine intervention or divine working in your life, especially if you haven't developed a relationship with divinity yet.
Right.
It's kind of where you get that aha moment, perhaps, is when you look back and you say, whoa, yeah, there's no doubt that God was playing a role in all of that. But if you don't give yourself the time to reflect on all of that with a deep, sincere mind, it might be hard to realize these things.
Yeah. And even just going forward from moment to moment as well. I mean, we can each kind of think of our lives as a laboratory for our own discovery of God. They say that each of us has a unique path. So we can't pattern ourselves after what someone else has done and expect to find God authentically. We have to do that in our own way. So all of these factors contribute to the effectiveness of that kind of almost laboratory-like engagement with our own lives and our thoughts and our experiences, and say, what can I learn from this? How can I improve this? How can I make it better? What are the potentials that I can reach for?
And so it's a process. That's something
right.
that's
It's a process, a living process.
It's a process. So like the state versus process whole theory. And so that's really what I want to talk about earlier, is that this belief is like a state that
belief
you're achieving, that you just want to get into, versus faith as a process that you're going through this work. As the apostles of work, we do things with God with us, you know, and then the result of good works comes this sense of accomplishment and joy.
Right.
But you can't just get that state. You have to go through this process of faith.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really important distinction about the difference between belief and faith. That belief is a state and faith is a process. So if you think about an expression like a leap of faith, that's all the trust. That means that you're trusting God. You're going to leap into your life. But think how active that is, how dynamic that is.
It's not the rest of faith or the
right. It's the leap of faith.
Yeah.
Right. It suggests risk and trust and all kinds of factors of unknown possibilities.
And it's like the opposite of ease seeking.
Yeah.
You know, but yet you're not a fool.
Right. Right. And part of not being a fool is about your beliefs.
Right.
You know, and so like I understand this, I understand this. These are my current beliefs about things. They're kind of set in place. So in that sense, they create a state of understanding. But then that's just your launching pad into the unknown of real experience.
And I will say that unknown, well, we're finite mortals and we will never know the unknown. We will and can and do know God. And the more we go into the unknown, the more known God becomes to us. And I think that's really important as we talk about relationship development.
It's the same with another person.
Sure. I mean, either you're going to go by the rumors, or you're going to go by the rumors of what you heard of this person, or you're going to go meet them. Or you're going to go meet them. Yeah. All right. Well, let me go into this next slide. So faith, faith leads to knowing God, not merely to a mystical feeling of the divine presence. So not just this state of bliss, which you know might be resultant of knowing God, perhaps, you know.
It might be part of worship,
might be
conceivably,
but the actual reality of knowing another personality is something practical.
Yeah, right. And it grows. It's dynamic. It's ever changing.
Yeah, it can grow. Always. And then let me just read this second part right here. Faith is man's true wealth. It is the endowment of virtue and glory.
Yeah, I think that's a very provocative statement. And I wouldn't have necessarily put all those ideas together in one sentence. But as I sort of attempt to understand what they're talking about, I can begin to see why they would put these ideas together. Because our faith, to the extent that it then supports our knowing God, there's faith leads to knowing God. Knowing God is the highest wealth.
That's your riches in heaven.
It's the richest wealth there is.
Right.
So and then it inspires our character, our development and expression of character into these realms of virtue and glory they come from God. They don't come from
this endowment,
our animal nature.
This endowment, or as we've said before here, our divine inheritance.
You
know,
right.
And it takes faith in order for us to kind of like discover our divine inheritance. You know, it's like there's a gold mine that we got to go mine, but it's the mine of faith, and we got to go get dirty in it. But the riches are beyond this world.
True
quite
enough.
Literally.
It will carry us into eternity.
Cool. Well, I know you got some quotes here. You want to? Yeah,
we can go to the next slide. All right. So this is one about faith, kind of in relation to self-mastery. And it says here, your secret of the mastery of self. Mastery of self. I mean, just think about that phrase, everything that implies. Your secret of the mastery of self is bound up with your faith in the indwelling spirit, which ever works by love. So we have the spirit dwelling within us that loves us. And if you are the children of this living faith, you are no longer the bond slaves of self, but rather the triumphant masters of yourselves, the liberated sons of God. So this gets into this fascinating, work that we're invited to step into that has to do with understanding selfhood and how selfhood relates to our nature as children of God. You know, Jesus taught us that God is our Father and we are his children. So to realize that and step into that is an experience of liberation and love. But we have to sometimes kind of overcome ourselves in order to fully give ourselves to God. Sure. And that's kind of what they're talking about here, I think, maybe among other things. But this concept of self-mastery runs all through the book, that we can't really be effective in service or in any relationship, or especially with God, until we can master ourselves to some degree. So our selfhood, or, the way we act, the way we think, our character, our personality, are all unified in this positive purpose. Because the self can run off with our lives if we're not careful and take us in all kinds of directions. Some people call it ego in a negative way. We could maybe talk, that maybe is sort of what they're referring to here also.
Yeah, this material self.
Yeah, your material self, your externally defined self, maybe is another way of putting that. Right. So this is an offering of an opportunity that's ours for the taking.
Yeah, through this sonship identity, you can be liberated from your material self.
Right. Right, which is going to happen sooner or later anyway.
Better accept it now.
Right.
And that's the truth, is that we're all, children of God. We're all brothers and sisters. So let's start using our divine inheritance.
Right. Step away from our physical nature into our spirit.
And I think the other thing is that, like, with faith comes this familiarity. The more you exercise faith, the more there's familiarity because you know God. Mm-hmm. And in knowing God comes a comfort. It isn't like you have to genuflect in his presence. It's almost like, I was talking with Paula about this, Paula Thompson, how we were talking about the familiarity with God is like going over to a good parent, like grandma's house or something. You can just kind of walk right in, open up the fridge like it's yours. Right. Kind of make yourself at home.
There's familiarity.
Plop down.
Yeah, it's a family. It's a family relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's so beautiful about that concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I by the way, I just want to point out too that I didn't mean to negate the physical self. The physical self is part of our nature. And the challenge is really to integrate that with our mental and spiritual natures.
Oh, hey man, I work the physical self every day.
Right.
I'm working my spiritual and mental in that.
It all goes together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's more the external definition of self that comes from the quote material world. That is the danger that confronts us every day because we're offered so many.
It's just not consistent. It will always change.
Yeah.
It's like the sands.
Yeah.
It's like building your house on sand or whatever, because whatever will happen in the environment will get reconstructed into something else.
But there's all these, especially through advertising and the media and other ways, like if you want to be cool, you need to be like this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are external self-definitions. If you want to keep up with what's trending, then you have to do this or that.
Yeah. Well, as we see, faith is not something that you consume or purchase or acquire. Faith, unlike a product, is something that you build and grow, and it's a process. A product you can purchase, and it can be a state of bliss that you can purchase and acquire or whatever.
You get a new car, your sense of identity changes.
You can change your profile picture or whatever, and you can feel different for a day. You can date somebody different and feel different for a day. But the thing that grows and is sustainable is through your faith, and that's your soul. And your soul is growing in this relationship with God. And it's only in this inner world that you can start to build that identity.
Right. Yeah. Becoming children of this living faith. Such an interesting.
And there's many more perks that come from it too.
Right.
Than just this identification of knowing that I'm a child of God. There are perks of benefits. There are benefits of being a child of God. And Chuck, you can read some of them right here, actually.
Is that the next slide?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So here we have a couple of interesting comments. Faith promotes spiritual vitality and righteous fruitfulness. I'll go ahead and read the other one. Choosing to do the will of God joins spiritual faith to material decisions in personality action. And I thought this last one was particularly interesting, and then how it ties with the first one also. But, we're all the time thinking about trying to understand the nature of the will of God. To do the will of the Father is sort of the goal of our existence. It's held up as the highest path, the greatest good for the greatest number and all of that. So the will of God. Okay, I want to do the will of God. And that's something we can choose to do. They're saying here, we can choose to do that, even if we don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
We can still make that our intention,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when we do that, that creates a bridge between our spiritual faith and our material decisions. So we're on this planet. We're material beings on the ground on this planet. So we're tied up with material decisions constantly, every day, and material actions. All the things we do touch physical reality. But to join that with spiritual faith elevates our purposes. So we approach all that with a higher purpose.
Would I be wrong by saying that that's Morantial?
Yeah, totally. That would, well, not totally wrong, but totally true. Yeah.
Totally right.
Yeah.
Well, I think about Jesus being the bridge from this planet to eternity.
Yeah,
or whatever.
right. Same idea. Same idea. And that and through all this, then we've discovered this new kind of spiritual vitality.
Right.
I love that phrase. And then also this notion of righteous fruitfulness, to where we become fruitful in our lives. So our lives aren't just an endless pattern of self-indulgence, which is always offered, buy this, buy that, do this, do that, and it doesn't actually create any righteous fruit.
Yeah.
Unless the intention behind the things we do has that purpose in mind.
Yeah, it seems that our intentions of consuming fruit and getting a sugar high.
Yeah, right. That's
versus
a good way of putting it.
Growing internally and then now yielding fruit. That
Producing fruit you can offer to others.
From,
Yeah. So righteous fruitfulness, spiritual vitality. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, I want to be spiritual. But then it's like, well, I don't even know what that means necessarily.
Yeah. Well, and it's definitely not a life of ease.
Yeah, right.
I
It
think
requires
that's
vitality.
really important to understand because I think sometimes in this blissful chase, this dope dragon people can chase, is a life of comfort and ease.
Right.
In it, thinking that that's some sort of angelic way of being, of like not getting your hands dirty or something like that. But when we really know what angels do, they're probably getting their hands dirtier than most beings out there if they're coming out here. And the way for us to go from little animal mortals to full-fledged spirit beings is to really show faith and to really work.
You're right. And that's always in relationship. So like working with God, working with Jesus. I mean, think about the hard work that Jesus did in his life. I mean, he was just like, he was a laborer in many ways. I mean, he was a fine craftsman and he led caravans and he did all kinds of things. But there's a lot of intense physical effort involved in much of the work that he did just in his life to sustain himself and support his family and all of that. But overarching all of that was this higher purpose that he always had in mind of revealing God in a new way that would help this planet and his universe. So, yeah.
So for this one, I'm taking true faith is, for me, something that I can live, something that is, I might not know what it's going to look like. Like in the material world, you know what you're going to purchase. You can test drive it. In God's will, you don't always know. You can't pre-test drive God's will, but you can know and have hope.
Well, you can know from the fruits.
Yeah.
If the fruits are good, then the decision was good.
Even in your foresight is kind of what I'm implying. Like even in your foresight of having faith, you might not know what you're stepping into.
That's true. Yeah.
And in that, it's counterintuitive, but this is how we grow. And that's the important thing, is to trust that, trust that from the internal guidance, not the external commercial.
Yeah. Take risks and you'll have companionship through that. Even if things go south, you won't be alone. Then you pick up, you learn from that, and you go on. That's kind of the promise of this type of faith, that it's not just true. I mean, it is true faith, but it's a true relationship. Maybe that's sort of the takeaway from me from this, that we're being offered a true relationship with God, and everything else will follow from that. Inspiration, companionship, determination, good-heartedness, friendliness, love, neighborliness, all of that is wrapped up in becoming more like God. And we do that by being with God.
Amen.
And knowing him.
Amen.
Through our own experience. So
All right. Well, thanks, Chuck.
Sure enough.
We invite you guys to stick with us for the next one.
Yep.
We're going to continue 4 of these on faith, and we're just going to keep going. So,
okay. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, indeed.
All right. God bless.